Test 1, test 2. Hey, welcome, Bill and Gunn. Welcome to the program today, a special media event from the Sovereign Yidindji government, and we're broadcasting right across the world today thanks to the the technology, and we just wanted to say thank you to everyone, and peace and blessings. Welcome, Bill and Gunn. Welcome to from the today, a special media event from the Sovereign Yidindji government, and we're broadcasting right across the world today thanks to the the technology. Yeah, sorry about that. That was a bit of feedback there. I forgot to turn off that microphone. But we're just broadcasting around the place, and we just wanted to say peace and blessings from the Yidindji nation to everybody, and whose territory that this spectrum is being used. And today we're just doing a presentation that's brought to you by the Yidindji, which is the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade of the Sovereign Yidindji government, in conjunction with the Office of the Attorney General. Ganyara of Yalmabara is here today, and he will be acting as the Attorney General. And Ganyara, we might start off with, I guess, a bit of a chat, and then we'll go. We've got a presentation that we'd like to do And feel free to type in questions via Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. And it's pretty casual. But we thought we'd give you a bit of an update on where we are at as the Yidindji government. So take it away.
Yeah, look, thanks for having us down here again today. Another beautiful day in paradise. This is just a bit of an overview as to why the Yidindji government is doing what it's doing and where we're going to head from with it all from here. The Commonwealth of Australia know who we are exactly. They can't not know us because we're the original people from this area of the world known as, to the Western world, Cairns, I suppose. But yeah, we're just one of them Indigenous nations that are back doing the right thing this time. And there is motive to this, and one is to secure a treaty or offer a treaty to the Commonwealth of Australia to protect it and to settle the past, I suppose, and secure the future. This is very important. Without us, it can't be done. The only people who can speak for our country are our people, and that's probably the most important thing. Originally, what happened when the colonials come, it said they dispossessed us of our land. They really just moved in. They didn't do things correctly. And the world decolonised eventually, and in this part of the world, Australia decolonised in 1986. And that means that the British left town, but they left behind the Australians. And this is the point now is that Australia know that they don't have a treaty with anyone to be here. So we're saying, okay, let's settle this problem left by the British, left by the colonial or the decolonisation process. So yeah, it's been a great journey. Now it started long before any of us were born, but we're here. We're at the present time, and the Yidindji government was basically formed under a tree back in 2013 when we realised just what we have to do. So yeah, look, it is going ahead in leaps and bounds now. So please feel free to contact us in any way, shape, or form, and we always welcome your questions.
Now, we are scheduled to broadcast for an hour today. We're happy to go over if there is quite a number of interest, but what we'll do is we'll actually give you a presentation as to the Yidindji nation and how its legal personality came about, and the reasons that Ganyara has just outlined some of those reasons. And it really is to settle the past and secure the future, but also to give that validity and protection of the Commonwealth and to the Commonwealth. So let's go with the first slide here. And so basically Yidindji is back, and Ganyara, you want to take it here from there?
Yeah, no, look, thanks. This is something we presented down south under invitation to go down south to present why we're doing what we're doing, as to why it's different. And now there's the evidence that we're using is coming from, you could say, the Commonwealth of Australia. We know who we are. We know we've always been here and always will be here. That's something that we do know. But we're now going to convince the rest of the world that we're here. And the only way we can do that is to use evidence that they've produced. Stuff that their academics, their smart people have put forward, their courts, their judges, whatever. There's one book that's really important that was produced a couple of years ago by Megan Davis and George Williams. Now, both of these are professors of constitutional law, very, very smart people. But they produced the book, Everything You Need to Know About the Referendum to Recognise Indigenous Peoples of Australia. Now, in that book, there's really, to us, there's only one page that really matters, and that's page 121. Now, they're talking about things inside Australia, but the evidence they produce at page 121 about the sovereignty of the people is very strong. We know it. We know it to be a fact. Now, one part of their thing of page 121, the little paragraph, they're talking about constitutional law. As it says, it does not affect how the Aboriginal people view their own sovereignty. As a result, it does not prevent them from asserting their own independence and their and the continuing validity of their laws and customs. Now, this is just a little excerpt. There's more to this quote that goes on, but we'll leave that for a bit later on. But as it says there, there's nothing that Australia can do that can affect our independence and our sovereignty. Our laws have always been here. They always will be here. They continue to be here. So they know that. But they're trying to control the damage that's being done. So yeah, this is just remember that one excerpt for a start. We'll just go to the next one there. This is the next page. So what is Yidindji? This is something everyone asked. You know, for those who aren't of this part of the world, you wouldn't have heard of Yidindji. You know, just what is it? It's an Aboriginal nation. It's an Indigenous nation. It's pre-colonial. We like to say we're pre-1770 nation. That was here first.
So it's certainly not a micronation.
No, most definitely not. No, this is one of the original nations that were here first. And we'll support that statement with some evidence produced by, once again, the best minds Australia could produce at the time. That's when they produced the Uluru Statement. Now, our Surveyor General of the Yidindji government produced a map outlining where Yidindji is. Now, you'll see it's not under the seal of the Commonwealth of Australia. It's actually done under our seal of our Indigenous nation, of our tribal nation. And to the northern limit there is what people want to call Port Douglas. Most people in the world have heard of that. In the centre part is Cairns, right down to the south of which is Innisfail, and we go west up into the Atherton Tablelands, and basically we're a rainforest society of people.
And this is a map that has been drafted by the Surveyor General under the instruction of various tribal elders, or what we would say Janala Yidindji, which is the group of each clan group that know those boundaries. And to date, no one's contested it with the Yidindji government. So it's a very important piece of paper in that it draws out. Now, obviously, if neighbouring tribes have differing views on that, obviously we'd be happy to look at those things. It's really important that you want to head down this track and you know, basically start the process, and you know, all that. If there's any potential changes, obviously then that can be negotiated and talked about, as most people know the boundaries, and that's really important. The other thing too, Ganyara Attorney General, is that I think people would ask, how did the process start? Because, like you said, it did start way before either of us got involved, but there was a beginning of the paper trail that has become the Yidindji Nation's legal personality, the Sovereign Yidindji government.
Well, it sure was, and you'll notice with this this next page here, we were sitting under a tree doing this. This is where this was penned, basically. Printed out, and then if you take notice of the date, it's January 2013. This is the evolution of modern governance into the Yidindji nation. So we've gone from an old tribal society that's always been here, always will be here, to one now that has adopted the modern protocols of governance, where people are voted in, voted out, whatever. And this is the signatures. There was 2 pages of signatures to this. This is all the elders that really mattered. They come into a number of meetings all over the territory, and it culminated in one up on the, if you want to call it Atherton Tableland, where we all sat together and decided this is the road we're going to go down. We want to get this up and running for the benefit of not only the Yidindji nation but the Commonwealth of Australia. So a notice of determination was eventually penned and agreed upon and signed off on by all the elders. Now, one bloke was chosen to go forward and let the world know that this is what's going on. So this was, at the time, sadly he's now passed away, but this is what he was instructed to go and do, was to tell the whole world Yidindji's back. So we didn't miss out on too many people, I hope, when we told the world. It went right from the Queen of England right down to the local police station, so they knew who we were. It was presented to them in a way that we know they got it, all through registered mail. Just being courteous. Not that we had to do that, but we done it out of courtesy. And we told them who to look out for. When you see our world, you will notice the first coat of arms was under the original tribal governance, where the old people were, and now we've come into the creation of the sovereign Yidindji government, where it's identified just like the coat of arms of Australia. It's, ours is identified by the cassowary and the serpent and the law shield and a bit of other stuff there to go with it.
I don't want to draw too many parallels because it might be incorrect, and you can please correct me if I'm wrong, but you could describe the first one as the House of Lords and the SYG as the House of Commons. They're two different spaces, and one instructs the other. But this is the coat of arms here, the identifier, and there we go.
So yeah, look, when you see the coat of arms, and the system is that we have the old tribal nation. That's where they know who they are, what they're doing, but that's a tribe. That's an original tribe. We had to create something equal to the Commonwealth of Australia. Now, the Commonwealth of Australia is just a piece of paper, nothing more, nothing less. I ask everyone, you show me where the Commonwealth of Australia is, and then no one can. This is the Constitution. So we had to create something very similar, so we can negotiate as equals. And we use the Vienna Convention on Treaties as a bit of a roadmap, a bit of a guide what to do. So we done that, and that's why we created the Yidindji government underneath the tribal authority. It's this evening up the playing field, I suppose, with that of the Commonwealth of Australia. Australia was never a tribe, so we had to come down to that level. We were always a tribe, always will be. So then we had to start to create the offices under that. So within the Commonwealth of Australia, there's people like the Prime Minister, the Attorney General, there's the whole range of ministerial postings, I suppose. So this is where we went down and started to create all our own offices. And there had to be a Chief Minister. Someone had to go forward and talk. Now, the original old bloke that was appointed to go forward, he passed away. The ball was handed down to the next bloke, and he holds the position of Chief Minister. And that's where, once again, we talk in English. If we talked in a language, not many people would understand it. So we're using English as a common language now. So people around the world can understand who we are and what we're doing. But you'll notice there is language used as a reference point to show what our departments are. So
here's my favourite department. Of course, this is the Minjani Wangalji, which is here described as the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. It is a way of conducting business that's been here since the beginning of time, really. And you can see all expressions of Yidindji sovereignty are in the coat of arms. They're expressed through the various government logos or department logos or crests. This one is the Nautilus shell, which is Binal, and the carpet snake is the carrier of trade on the Yidindji territory. And so yeah, it's a very interesting way of doing business. And let's go to the next one.
Well, you'll notice they're all in public notice form, so we told the world what we're doing. Now we created the Minister for Foreign Affairs and Trade, which is a very important role, believe it or not. If you look at the Montevideo Convention on the on states, there's four important things to be, I suppose, a modern state. One is to have a population. One is to have a system of governance. One is to have a territory, and the other is to have a way of communicating with the international world. And that's what the Minister for Foreign Affairs and Trade does. Now, Australia is foreign to us. We were never part of Australia. It's actually foreign to us. So we had to create this position for the Minister to be able to go forward and talk to the Commonwealth of Australia. As strange as it seems, we were never Australian. We were never allowed to be Australian. They sort of don't really want us there because we know where our law is. So how do we get to this point? It got back to this point of not having this representation. It always comes to who we are. And there was always this point that we had sovereignty always along here. Now, the Uluru Statement from the Heart was produced by a hand-picked, the Prime Minister hand-picked a bunch of constitutional lawyers that they thought were the best at the time. And they actually put out a statement back in mid-2017. This was their best minds. And they said the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander tribes are the first sovereign nations. Now, that's a very important point. We're first and sovereign. And nation. So the three words, first sovereign nation, is a very important determiner on the Australian continent. Now, that's in a geographical location and its islands. And that those Aboriginal nations and Torres Strait Islander nations possessed it under their own laws and customs. Not laws and customs of Australia, but of their own making prior to the coming of the Commonwealth of Australia. And then they go on about the sovereignty of it. This link to the basis of the ownership of the soil, or better, of sovereignty, has never been ceded or extinguished and coexists with the sovereignty of the Crown. So we then got to ask, what is sovereignty? Now, sovereignty is this ability to be able to make law and decision making without any other man-made law above you. So that's the one that's never been ceded.
It's very important because when you look at a number of native title determinations here, it says that the Yidindji people own the land pursuant to their law. And I can just see the mayor of the Torres Strait Shire Council walking past there. And I'm sure they'd be interested in watching this broadcast later on. But Yidindji own the land pursuant to their law, so the Commonwealth of Australia has been quite truthful in telling that story, because we know that there's a number of things, but it's how you read the law. What is the law? How readest thou? And you've got to read it from your true and correct capacity, which is what we're doing through the Yidindji government. But it's really important because Australia was and is continuing to uphold that law in a very strange way. We want to grant it some sort of benefit and consent to be here because of that, that truth-telling journey. But I guess that's why we're really thankful for those experts. That at the Uluru Statement, the Yidindji Nation was not a co-author of the Uluru Statement from the Heart. We were not invited, and that's probably a good thing. And congratulations to those experts. What is sovereignty, Ganyara? I think it's a massive question. A lot of people find it confusing, but let's try and have a look at it. Let's try and cut our teeth with it.
Well, sovereignty itself is where law emanates. We're not, as humans, we're not a sovereign entity in its own right in the world of paper law. When we look at modern sovereignty now, there's many variations of sovereignty, but when we look at the modern one, in law it implies that there is no legally authorised human authority that is competent to regulate the state's affairs, which means that law emanates from somewhere. It emanates from a constitution. Inside Australia, it's the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Australia, where the law comes from. All law is derived from there, including the legal identities that are created. So the Australian citizen is created subject to the Australian Constitution. That's an important part for people to understand. And this is where what we're talking about statehood. So it all comes back to there. So how can we have? So if it's man-made law, how can we have a system of coexisting sovereignties? On what you want to call Australia. We actually can't. One has to be more superior, or the other has to be more inferior, or be inferior to the other, unless there's a treaty in place where we can let the two live harmoniously.
Coexist correctly.
Absolutely. So coexisting, but under whose sovereignty, whose law?
Whose protection. This is what it's all about. We're offering that, the Yidindji Nation's offering that protection and all the comforts and benefit that come from it.
Well, look, our law was always here. It always was. and it always will be. So we've always got this problem of being first in time. Australia is now second in time. It was actually third in time for a while there, while the colonial nation was here. So we were here first. And then come Australia, then come the colonial world, the British colonial, if you want to call them states, but they were colonies.
Crown right of.
Yep. And then there was like the colony of New South Wales, the colony of Queensland, all that. And then when they left, then there was the Commonwealth of Australia took second place. So we can't have this thing of coexisting sovereignty unless there's a formal agreement in place to let this all exist. So whose law has priority? And when we were never back, the Australian law had priority. So no one can escape that, except us. We were never part of it. Now, what lets sovereignty, I suppose, rule over you is that you subscribe to take membership inside the Commonwealth of Australia, or you take membership inside the Yidindji nation. So it's all about your voluntary membership into something. And in this situation, with the Yidindji people, they were left out. So they had one option, and that was to subscribe to the sovereignty, the membership inside the Yidindji nation. We weren't afforded the ability to take part in the Commonwealth of Australia. That was simple as that. They didn't want the Aboriginal people. Now, we never ceded our law. Now, what session means is basically an incoming mob come in and take charge of all your stuff, or whatever you want to give to them.
Yeah, I think we hear a lot of people saying sovereignty was never ceded, and in fact, many representatives of the Australian parliaments in the past have actually said that also. So let's take a look at that.
Absolutely. Look, for session to take part, it has to be carried out under treaty or some physical transfer. You just can't go and move into someone's house and say, I own the house. And the same here. So we've never done that. The Yidindji nation has never, ever, under any treaty or transfer anything to the Commonwealth of Australia or to the colonial state of Queensland, the colony of Queensland. So we haven't done that. We haven't passed any sovereignty of our territory to anyone else, and no one has been there to take it. Now, we can give it away if we want, or we can give it away for money, but that is not the point. The point is, they just moved into our house. They actually didn't ask for it. They just moved in and applied their law to their people, and we can show that in a number of cases where Yidindji citizens have been thrown out of courts here because not of the jurisdiction, they're not of the Commonwealth of Australia.
I think I might remember that one.
Yeah, I think you were part of it. You were one of them. And that's a very important point because
yes,
it's how you participate in a certain jurisdiction where sovereignty of that society reside.
One of the, when we do go and conduct our business elsewhere, some of the concerns that people have is that for some reason they fear that they've been told that their native title rights have been extinguished. So let's take a look at that. I think it's a really important issue to look at.
Oh, look, it really is, and native title and all that. Remember, native title is within Australia. Our sovereignty has not been extinguished. Extinguished means to bring to an end a contract, by one or both parties under the operational law. Was there ever a treaty in place to extinguish in the first place? There was never a treaty. There's nothing to extinguish. We were just here, and we were just put to one side, and there they brought their law in for their people. So there was never a treaty in place or any contract in place to extinguish anyway. So that left our law first in time. And as the Uluru Statement said very clearly, it's still here today. We own this place pursuant to our law. Now, if a treaty was there, we would have bargained away some of that right to own the place or whatever. And that's led us now to this current situation of coexisting sovereignties. Now, there are multiple sovereignties in Australia, and one is the Commonwealth of Australia, and then the states, state of Queensland, state of New South Wales. So they're all different sovereign levels, but one is the boss. One is the boss is the Commonwealth of Australia. But our law, as they've acknowledged in the Uluru Statement from the Heart, our law coexists outside of that of the Commonwealth of Australia. It's separate. And that's an important thing to understand. We were not part of Australia, nor is our law. So if that's the case, they've acknowledged in the Uluru Statement that we have sovereignty. It's got to be of equal, if not better, sovereignty to that of the Crown. it's there, but we've got to go and assert our sovereignty. And we've got to start to form all the modern entities, I suppose, and systems of being a modern state that can utilise this sovereignty properly.
Yeah, I think the French word is the accoutrements, so the lapels, the little badges, and all that kind of stuff on a paper level has to be done. And you're right, there was no contract here because there would be one of the great things about the Westminster system is that it's a parliament of record. And remember, it's the Australian experts and the British experts are saying that there's no treaty here. And if there was one done, it hasn't been produced. And was it done in accordance with satisfaction by all parties in their true and correct capacity? And we have asked that question of various foreign persons, and that hasn't been forthcoming. So I think that's a very important thing. The offer of a treaty from the Yidindji government will be with accord and satisfaction, 100%, and it's something that is really important. And we'll talk about this later, Ganyara, but I think maybe there's some people out there who might watch this and who may be watching it saying, what can I do to help? But I think it's also important to say that this treaty is not about money. And in fact, the Yidindji government has been on record about saying, we're not interested in taxpayer money inside of Australia at all, or any Australian money for that matter. So it's an important, very, very, people might find that concept strange, but we know the value of money, but we prefer community, we prefer nation building, we want peace, we want to move forward together and conduct that business, but really empower the Commonwealth of Australia to go forth with confidence around the world and to represent in some way the Yidindji nation at that international law level. But we can talk about that a little bit more.
Oh, look. The money is the problem that's trapping everyone in there. So it's not about the money for us. We understand what value it is, and there are other mechanisms in place to allow the people to exist. But as we said, we've got to start to build our stuff. And one is we had to build a state, the sovereign state, which is what the Yidindji government really is all about. And as it says, as you can see there, you have a defined territory. We have a defined territory. We've actually made the map up. It's always been there. We have a permanent population, which has always been Yidindji. Mm-hmm. We're now building the effective government and the ability to enter into international relations. Now, that's just in accord with the modern Montevideo Convention on the Rights and Duties of States. So, as it says, all the way through, it's what about being in the modern world. Now, we can modernise everything we want to do. Now, we have all of that. But I always ask the question, where is Australia's territory? If we have the territory, if all the Aboriginal people own the territories, what does Australia have? And I'm saying to everyone now, if we come back and do our stuff, you've got to rebuild your government and get your population back into place. And that's why I asked the question, where is your permanent population in your government created subject to your law and authority of your constitution, not of the constitution of the UN member state that you may currently reside in? And that's a very important point as to where the legal personalities are created. If you're using one created inside Australia, that's dishonourable to the Commonwealth of Australia, which has let you use their person. And the person belongs to the Commonwealth of Australia. It really is an Australian citizen that you've been seen legally and politically through.
And that was the very reason why the other person in Australia couldn't represent the Yidindji nation at this level, as Foreign Affairs Minister, for example, because it would bring possibly into disrepute the Commonwealth Constitution Act of 1901. But furthermore, there's a real, I think it's important that once you identify, let's say, a problem or an error at law, it's one thing to point at that, but when it becomes obvious, then what is the remedy? What is the solution? How can we move on from that? And that's what this is all about right now.
And that's why we had to go down this road, and that's exactly what we're doing. And that's why we said, okay, we'll define who we are. Now you'll see that a territory is a part of the Earth's surface, and that's under the jurisdiction of a certain government. Now, in our place, if you want to call it Queensland, but in our place of Yidindji, our territory starts at, for the Western world, Port Douglas, goes down to Innisfail, covers the Atherton Tableland. If that's ours, then quite obviously it's not the possession of the Commonwealth of Australia. It's not within the, it's under our jurisdiction. And our jurisdiction is, our law has always been here and always will be here. So if that's our territory, where's that of Australia? And that's within our boundary. So we've got that. Now every other Aboriginal nation actually in the world has exactly the same right and ability to do this, especially inside Australia where there was no treaty at all. Now, to show that Australia know what we're doing, they actually do this thing called native title under the Native Title Act 1993.
Before we go there, Brother Ganyara, I think when we look at this and we step back, this is about curing all the errors.
Absolutely.
The error in the description of title, that link between the Yidindji world and to the Commonwealth will give it that strong system of land tenure that would go in, as part of this agreement. That's what I think. This is a really important thing to conceptualise now, as that this is the security of person, security of tenure, and with that you can, as I have said before, really turn Australia into a superpower.
Well, where is their homeland? Where's their territory? And that's the problem. If you look at what this one on a bit of case law there, with regards to native title, which is within Australia, you actually got to be an Australian citizen of Aboriginal descent to go into the court to get a determination handed down as to if you are still the owners of your country.
Fair enough.
Now the Act, and as they say in this one here, Mundarabee on behalf of the combined Mundingalpai Yidindji people versus Queensland, the Act simply provides a way in which Aboriginal people can prove traditional ownership of land, and this is the important part, which ownership has existed since before European settlement in Australia. It's first. So it's designating ownership of something. Of what? So who's authorised and competent to regulate that ownership? And that's the sovereignty of the Aboriginal nation. That's the sovereignty of the Yidindji nation. So as it says there was another determination handed out over in West Australia, and it's a really good one because it shows that Australia cannot give what it does not have. Now, Pei on behalf of the Gurupa people versus the state of West Australia, 2007, in making these orders, understand this, in making these orders, the court does not give you native title. No, the court determines that native title exists. The court determines that this is your land. It's not Australian land now, it's your land. That's it, the people he's talking about. That it is based upon your traditional laws and customs which have always been, and that means that the law says to all people of Australia that this is your land and always has been your land, because your law and custom have said and say so today, that this is your land. Australia can't give the land to them. They already own it.
Yeah, I think Nemo dat non quod habet is the Latin possibly used for this particular occasion. I think that one cannot give which one does not possess. I think is
100%. So native title is telling you that you have system of law and authority in place that you can go and use. So in saying that, the once again we come back to the Mundingalpai determination, Mundingalpai Yidindji one, which is Yidindji.
Yep.
By the way, they said, look, we never created, Australia never created all the titles.
Yes.
They were created subject to laws and authority created by the sovereignty of the Yidindji nation. So the Yidindji nation has always been here and always will be. And he's saying to the Yidindji people that I've come to acknowledge to them, and before all other people, that all Australians recognise and accept them as the traditional owners of the claim area. If we own one area, we own the lot because there's no treaty in place.
I like what it continues to say this, because I do so in a way which binds all people. How many people? Everyone. for when? All time, not just for this little 5-minute window or half an hour in the next 10 years, of all time. In particular, my decision binds who? The Commonwealth of Australia, the state of Queensland, and it says it there, Yarrabah Aboriginal Shire Council, which is a juridical person created by the Commonwealth Constitution Act of 1901. It's a derivative of that. So what we're saying here, it's very important that we are here to protect all those levels of governments inside of Australia. And how much money do you want for it?
Not for sale.
Not for sale. It's free.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things now where I think this will assist other people around the place to, and we've got potential people listening to this and watching this in Canada as well, in New Zealand, that and we can talk about UNDRIP another time, I guess, but let's continue with the ownership factor, because this is really important. Now, we know that when the heads of states or whoever it is, people having a normal event, will, like you say, we want to recognise and acknowledge the traditional owners, for example. That's quite an important thing.
It really is. It's acknowledging the existence of that law. Welcome us into your country. We were never ever, Yidindji were never Australians. We were never Aboriginal Australians. That's why our sovereignty still exists to this very day. It's hard for people to get their head around when we say we were never allowed to be part of Australia, but it was the White Australia policy. If you look all the way back, even at the time of the conception of the Commonwealth of Australia, the Aboriginal people in if you want to call it the colony of Queensland, they were excluded 100%. It's even in the National Archives of Australia that is recorded there. So all the way through, they tried to assimilate the people in. They couldn't do that. They've done everything wrong. If you could do something wrong, Australia done it all the way in the colonial world. So it then gets to the world of, and this is a very important part, starting to assert your sovereignty to show who you really are. And the assertion of sovereignty is there for a reason. Now, the sovereignty is very important. Who's going to do a treaty with Australia? Now, John Howard got it right when he said, a nation can't treaty with itself, and that's a very important point. So if you're all Australian citizens, you are negotiating with yourself. And that's not at law, that's not right. So as a sovereign nation, which is where Yidindji is, and that's why we had to do this, we are now in a position to offer a treaty to the Commonwealth of Australia. And once again, there is case law out there that actually goes on about this, about your sovereignty. And there's one there, in the Grumpa, versus the Brisbane Shire Council. This is going back to 2014. And it actually says there, in the decision from the court, as it says there, that the critical question for a municipal court is what reach the sovereign claims for itself, not what reach other sovereigns may concede to it. So the Commonwealth of Australia will give us nothing if we don't stand up to be who we are. If we want to go inside their world, inside their court, it actually shows you're subject to their constitution and you want to be part of Australia through and underneath the Constitution of Australia. You are not sovereign enough to be entering into treaties.
And that's something that not only the Yidindji government, but the ones that created it in terms of the Yidindji society and if you want to describe it as a royal society, certainly want to maintain on this territory, is that to be out of law is a concern, and what the Yidindji society through the Yidindji government is actually bringing the Australian family and the Yidindji family together. But you know, when we looked at these micronations like the Hutt River Province and things like that, you talked about first in time law. People who want to identify themselves and break away from the Commonwealth of Australia, for example, you know, that can be potentially dangerous. And we know that the sovereign citizen issue around the world is quite potentially dangerous, and it's something that the Yidindji nation does not support. Now, that's a another very important message there as well.
Well, it really is, and look, we'll come back to Hutt River in a sec there, but the outlaw part of it, which is very important. Whose law are you getting out of? Now, you can get out of Australian law if you want, but you're going to be subject to the tribal law. It's always on the country. So there's no room for sovereign citizen. And for that matter, the Commonwealth of Australia is second in law. So you can jump out of that, but there's still always this one ahead of you that's first in time law. And that's the Indigenous laws as they acknowledge as existing and coexisting with that of the Crown. So no one can escape that one. So if you may leave Australia or you may leave wherever, but tribal law is always standing there before you. It's always been there first.
Yes.
It's always positioned in law. Now, as I said in one statement recently in a newspaper article with regards Hutt River, a constitutional lawyer actually said, don't draw any parallels between the I suppose Hutt River style
Hobbyists.
the hobbyist, and the traditional original owners of the place. That is very, very important. They are not the one and the same thing. One has a claim that has sovereignty, the other one doesn't. One is just make-believe, the other is for real. And it is the for real lot that are offering the treaty to the Commonwealth of Australia. So yeah, we're now going to start to act like a nation. If we're going to have sovereignty, we're going to start to do this as a nation. And that's to bring the people together.
And that's what I alluded to before, was that we can spot the error and just continue to point at the error and saying you're doing wrong, or we can say, look, we want to fix you, we want to help, bridge the gap or close the gap from our standing, right? And this is a very important part of it. So let's look at acting like a nation looks like.
Well, we started to rebuild everything, got all our ministers in place, and the problem for the Commonwealth of Australia, and I'll say this, there's a big problem, because we went and offered them a treaty. They got nothing to offer us. They got no country to offer us, because we are still the correct owners of our country under our law. So what do they have to offer us as a nation? And that's a real problem for them. So we have to offer them the treaty to let them put their constitution here on our country, and then let Australia be here. So we went down in 2017 to Canberra and said, look, at the time, Mr Prime Minister, here's a deal. We want to start a roadmap towards a treaty, and we have to offer you something. So part of that deal was that in the end we'd let them do the administrative work, represent us at the international level, while we still retain rights and control over our country and whatever happens in certain issues. We've got to cede something, and they've got to give something. So this is give and take all the way. So that's what it was all about. This is part of building the treaty that they so desperately should have done, or they desperately need, and they should have done 100 years ago, 120 years ago. That was a fatal flaw in Australia. They should have done this. We know it, but we're the only one who can offer the remedy, and that's the Indigenous nation. So we're doing that, and this is what it's all about. So as we done that, we started to act like a nation. We started to do all our own stuff. We're passing acts and laws and bills. They're all getting through. A good one is, the Postal Act, for example, where we now issue, or we have a Currency Act, which then allows us to issue postage stamps. So it goes all, it just starts acting as though we're fair dinkum. But the most important one is the Citizenship Act. So how do you become a citizen of Yidindji? And it's under the Citizenship Act. And there is a bit there where quite a number of people have taken up the offer. Yeah.
I think currently we have just under 100 persons and citizens.
Yeah, legally issued identities.
Yeah, exactly.
And but one of our aims is to protect the Commonwealth of Australia. Now, it's causing harm to itself. It really is. By doing what it keeps doing, and that is being, as Rachel Seward said, Senator Seward said, we're the intruders, we're the boat people. You talk about the Australian people. So they're the unlawful intruders in our territory, and they know that. But how do they get out of where they are at? So we're the only one that can help them out. So under the Postal Act now, we can issue postage stamps. And one thing I assure you, the Constitution clearly stipulates, the Commonwealth of Australia Constitution clearly stipulates that the Commonwealth is in charge of postage. Now, if we were doing anything wrong under Australian law by issuing these postage stamps, we should rightfully be arrested, we should rightfully be in jail if we're under Australian law, but we're not. This is issued under Yidindji law, which is nothing to do with Australia, totally separate to their world. They're issued under our law. Now, if they come to arrest us for the issuance of postage stamps under our law, they'll have to justify how their constitution is superior to ours and takes over our part of the world without a treaty. And this is what I mean. We have every legal right under our own law to issue postage stamps. We don't have to stay as an old barbaric nation sitting back there, in dugout canoes.
Well, the Queen doesn't travel around Cobb and Co. around the world. She probably does it for ceremonial purposes in London and other places, but if she needs to go to Jamaica, she's not on a tall ship, she flies there, and, fair enough. If you're going to act and lead, then do it with all the affordability of modern technology and things like that. So people should get out of their head that this is all about, you gotta be put paint on. No, that's tribal law. That is something that the Yidindji government is not touching. It's just creating this office space for the paper government. This belongs to God. This here is something different. That's the Yidindji government office there, and so we're creating all that pieces of paper with that intention of looking after the Commonwealth and anyone else who wants to visit our territory, a tribal governance sort of point of view as well. Ganyara, the thing to remind people of was Professor George Williams was one of the authors of that particular book, and we're going to go back to that quote again.
Well, we'll put the rest of the quote together now. Out of that book, from everything you need to know about the referendum to recognise Indigenous Australia. The Australian Constitution, you've got to understand this, the Australian Constitution represents the Australian position under Australian law, of which the Constitution is the ultimate expression. That's everything Australian. It does not affect how the Aboriginal people view their own sovereignty. So nothing that can be done in Australia can affect how we look upon our own sovereignty that's acknowledged as existing. As a result, it does not prevent them from asserting their own independence and the continuing validity of their laws and custom. That's exactly what Yidindji have been doing. Australia is for Australians, the Australian law. So it's us now doing our thing. And this is what I'm saying. They know this. They know it. They know that we know it. And this is how we've got to be now. So we've got to be sensible about this. We do have a certain power in our hands if we use it correctly.
Sorry about that, but yeah, I think you made that point about the stamps and how if Australians do that, creating their own number plates and stamps and trying to create something within Australia, then that is a very dangerous place to be in terms of breaking the law. However, the Yidindji nation has that law. Not only has it created its stamps and everything else, which it has its 100% legal right to do, but once again, Australia acknowledges the sovereignty, but Australia also signed up to the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which appears to support what Yidindji is doing. This is really important.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Australia signed up, it just showed intent. That Australia understand what's going on, the UN know what's going on, and so they formulate this document. Now remember, Australia hung out for a couple of years on this. It was basically supported by the rest of the world in 2007. 4 big ones hung out, Commonwealth of Australia, New Zealand, the US and Canada. Mm-hmm. So they hung out, we don't really like what's written in there, but Australia supported this back in April 2009. So look, that shows intention of, yet we agree with what's written in there. They could have taken out articles of that document, but they didn't. They left it intact. So as we go through and see it, the first part of UNDRIP states that the Indigenous nations, and you've got to ask the question, okay, well, who are the Indigenous nations? Who are they? And they are the Aboriginal people of this part of the world, the Torres Strait Islander people of this part of the world. And I use the word Aboriginal very loosely to differentiate the people that were never part of Australia. They're the original people that were always here, the ones that were pre-colonial, the ones that were pre-1770. So that's us, the original nations. So Australia know that we can do this. And the first part of UNDRIP, Articles 3, 4, 5, 6 and 7, 8, state that we can come back and look after ourselves, self-determination, look after our own internal affairs, rebuild our institutions. And also, and importantly in Article 5, it gives us a choice to participate in the life of the state. Yeah. So if you look at Article 5, which is really good, it shows that if we so choose, now I'll read it for you again so correctly this time. Indigenous people have the right to maintain and strengthen their distinct political, legal, economic, social and cultural institutions while retaining their right to participate fully, if they so choose, in the political, economic, social and cultural life of the state. You see there's two things for us to participate in, our law, their law. And the question always remains, what if we don't so choose to take part in the life of the state? We're under our law.
Well, what if we can't? What if the Australian Constitution does not allow that?
Which is the real problem, isn't it?
I think that's the issue here that we're trying to fix.
Australia was built on the White Australia policy. But as this statement is supported by the Uluru Statement from the Heart, that these entities are coexisting. There's us and there's them. But we've got a right to take part in the other side if they want to allow us in. And Australia was based on the White Australia policy. Now, the Australian Constitution's intent was to form a government for a society of people who did not want the people of Asian descent or of African descent or of Aboriginal descent. This was the British outpost in the South Pacific, as was mentioned by the Prime Minister in the Second World War. But can they kick us off our country? Can they force us into the state if we don't so choose? If we say no, we don't want to take part in Australia, can they force us in? Well, under Article 8 that Australia supported, no, it can't. There can be no form of assimilation or integration or the destruction of our world. So you see, they understand this stuff. We know it. So what's going to be the situation when we come back fully with all our institutions up against Australia with all their institutions? Who takes right of way? Who has the legal right of way here? And that is the first in time law. And that can only be cured by a treaty. That's as simple as it gets. It takes a treaty to fix that up. So they can't take us away from our country. They can't take the country from us.
And that was a very interesting. It sort of addressed that issue, but not in its entirety with the Toms and Love case. But that's a little bit different to what we're talking about here. Article 10. Indigenous people shall not be forcibly removed from their lands and territories, nor relocations to territories. Exactly. So, yeah. I mean, this is the whole point. The Yidindji nation, through the sovereign Yidindji government, wants to assist the Commonwealth not only have that security of person, security of tenure, but also go through these check boxes.
Well, the issue that most people get lost in is the capacity of the legal identity that they're seen legally and politically through. If you're seen legally through the Australian identity, they can do whatever they like with their personality. It's our personality they have a problem with. When we create our legal identity, they have a real problem with us because we're not of the jurisdiction. We are invisible. Our persons, our personalities, legal identities are invisible inside the Australian court. So that's what I'm saying. There's a real issue when we come back into true and correct capacity, not of Australia, but of our world, of our tribal world. So it then gets to the problem of, they know that under Article 27, that they have to address things like native title, address our land titles. They've got to cover that. And that's what Article 27 is all about. So they're showing that they're doing the correct things, that our laws and customs are here, that our system of land tenure is here. We have the right to do whatever we want to do. So they can see that. They know we're here. That leads to the question of Article 28. How can anyone, any nation in the world, cover Article 28? Either give the land back to us, to the Indigenous nations, give them somewhere else of equal stature, or pay them for the place. Now, they can't give it back because Australia is, you could say, 25 million people. Where are they all going to go? They're not going to go overseas, they've got nowhere to go to, they really belong in our world. So that's about keeping the Australian citizen here. So they can't give the country back because they haven't really taken it. We just walked away from it. So they can't give us someone else's country because all of the globe is occupied by someone. But how much money? If they would say, okay, how much money do you want? Well, what's the value of the place? What's the value of that piece of land we described as from Port Douglas to Innisfail to the Atherton Tablelands? What's the dollar value of that? Let alone what's the dollar value of Australia? It would bankrupt the nation, it would bankrupt Australia just paying us out if we want to go in dollar terms. So we say, okay, don't worry about the money. There's another mechanism at play that we can use. And that's for another conversation later on. But our sovereignty has always been here. That's the problem for Australia. They can see it, they know it, they can smell it. It's always been here. But how do we go to the next level? And that's the negotiating what we want to give away in the treaty, I suppose. What we want to cede to them. And one thing is the country, the land itself, is not up for grabs. That will always be the country of the Yidindji nation here. So we've got to form a legal agreement as to who's going to be doing what in a legal agreement. Now, Yidindji government is always going to be here. They're not going to go away. We're not going to cede all and absolute authority to the Commonwealth of Australia. We're going to be here so that they can cooperate and consult with our system of government for our people. So before they do anything in our country, they talk to the Yidindji government, and the Yidindji government puts it to the Yidindji people as to what is going to happen on the territory. It's the country of the Yidindji people. That's the problem with Australia.
This is why the Commonwealth of Australia, the conversations are about treaty. Yofi Yindi, the song, everyone knows the treaty. Barry Cedric sings a song from Yarrabah about treaty. This word's been tossed about here, left, right and centre. And it is about settling the past and securing the future. But from our point of view, it has to be done from the head of the administration to the Chief Minister of the Sovereign Yidindji government. It can't be done with Queensland or New South Wales or ACT because they are juridical persons that are bound or merged into that immutable constitution there back in 1901.
Well, look, they're subject to the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Australia. They are a consequence of the federation process. They come into existence in 1901 when the Australian Constitution come to life. So they are ultimately subject to the Australian Constitution. So in saying that, they are not, and there's case law on this, they are not sovereign enough to enter into international treaties at present between other UN member states, and they're definitely not sovereign enough to enter into any treaty, especially with our nation. It has to be the Commonwealth of Australia, or if, and then this raises an interesting question. We have a right to cede sovereignty if we so choose. So, what happens if the Commonwealth of Australia don't want to take up the offer that we've offered them? Would that then leave us the right to cede sovereignty to another UN member state? We have the right to cede it. Remember, we have this right to cede sovereignty if we want to.
Yes.
We may not want to cede anything. We may want to cede the whole lot. But what if we choose to offer it to another nation because Australia has declined the offer? You see the problem that's developing? So we're offering this. We're offering the remedy. We're offering the cure for Australia to let it be here. And now Australia is in a jam because the minute they accept the treaty meant they didn't have it before. If they decline the offer, they don't want to be here. So where do they go? How do they educate their Australians that the house you may be living in, that you may be paying for, is linked to another land title somewhere else?
Yes, and look, thank you so much for joining us, everybody, and please retweet or subscribe or follow to the various accounts that you might be watching this on. And Ginyara, thanks for your time today. Excuse me. I guess this is it'll be a weekly session, and over the next year or more, continuously, we will introduce new subject matters, but also introduce members of the Yidindji society and talk to government ministers about some of the priorities that they've earmarked for their government departments and what they want to contribute to the territory. May God's peace be upon you through his only Mikot San Yeshua HaMashiach. And we just say thank you very much for tuning in, and peace and blessings from the Yidindji Nation to wherever you are listening to this or watching it. Take care, and we'll catch you next week. Garu.
Yeah, go.